Hey reader, welcome back to the channel, and today we are finishing up British Week by taking a look at the PIAT, the Personal Infantry Anti-Tank Weapon, which is one of the anti-tank options available to the British in both 2nd edition and 3rd edition of Bolt Action. We're going to take a look at this, much like how we have other team weapons, especially the ones that are moving around doing maneuver fighting. So we'll be looking at their range and rate of fire. We'll look at their opportunity cost and maximization. We'll look at their pin generation, damage potential, their ability to take and hold objectives, because those are different. We'll look at target prioritization, how you should use these guys to increase their efficiency in your army, and then look at the one change that I would recommend. So to start off with, in 2nd and 3rd edition, they both have 12 inches with one shot, right? Which makes sense. This is, a relatively short range anti-tank weapon. It is firing a single shell, and it did take a decent bit in order to reload it. Maybe not as long as other, one attack weapons in Bolt Action, but it doesn't have a particularly zippy or fast rate of fire. In 3rd edition, it does gain an additional benefit. So in addition to having, the shape charge special rule, one of the benefits of the shape charge special rule that's new in 3rd edition is that when you fire it at a building, not a ruin, mind you, not a forest, mind you, not a stone wall, none of that. What it does is, instead of being resolved with its typical pen +5, you can instead resolve it with an HE 2-inch blast, which is actually quite nice. It means that if you have an infantry squad that's hiding in a building, instead of, trying to hit with one dice, and then if you hit, sure, pen +5 is, probably twos, in order to wound. And then, ooh, cover save, right? Instead of doing something like that, now it's an HE 2-inch blast, which means you're going to be rolling a D6 for how many hits you do. So on average, you're going to be doing more hits, assuming that you get that first initial hit against the building. And then you're probably going to end up in the long run doing more wounds. So while it is still not an exceptional flex weapon between infantry and armor, it is still heavily dominated by the armor side of things. At least now it has something you can do to infantry. Admittedly, if they decide to run into a building as you are approaching them or as they are approaching you. Not the most common thing in really high level play of bolt action, but you know what? Sometimes cover is cover, and the only way to get cover is to go into the building, right? So, it all depends. But at least if that's the case, it has a little more utility than it did in previous editions. In terms of cost, you're comparable to a bazooka in terms of profile. You're a good bit cheaper, right? You're only 40 points regular instead of 60 points regular, so there's that. But you do also have half the range of a bazooka, so you are having to get in pretty close, which is tricky, but it is a way that you can field more of them. They are taking up less of your points for that, so it just depends on how much risk you're willing to invite by bringing yourself in closer to the enemy. You also don't have the fixed special rule, so you are capable of advancing and moving and shooting in the same turn. It does mean be very careful. You have to make sure that, when you pop around a corner to suddenly take a shot at a vehicle, or pop, around a forest or through a forest in order to take a shot, do make sure that the body of the shooter is still obscured, because per the rules for cover, more than half the unit has to be in cover in order for you to get the cover benefit. So his body will need to be protected. This is the #1 issue that bazooka teams, Panzerschreck teams, PIAT teams, light mortar teams, AT rifle teams are all having in 3rd edition, is finding a way to make sure that both people are covered while still having the line of sight they need in order to perform the attack. Okay, so just keep that in mind. In terms of opportunity cost, it's a relatively cheap order dice. You're looking at 40, just under 50 points at veteran. So, it's affordable, which is really nice. There is a hidden cost, though, because in order to really maximize these guys and make sure that you can get into range without getting shot up by machine guns before you get within range of the PIAT, you probably are taking a transport for these guys, and you're probably taking it as an armored transport as opposed to a Jeep or, some other, light truck, some sort of soft skin vehicle. So because of this, the cost isn't actually 40 to 48. I could easily see you spending roughly 30 points on a Stuart Kangaroo, which is, damage value 7, fully open top, but you can throw the platoon commander in there too, because it has space for 4. And then at that point, your platoon commander will give you a good enough morale that even if you start taking pins on the unit from being in the transport when it gets shot at, you're actually still likely to activate and jump out. And, we'll talk about ways to kind of optimize this when we get to objective taking later on in the video. But just suffice it to say, The cost is probably not actually 40 points regular. It's probably closer to like 70, 75 points regular. Okay. And similarly, it's probably not a little south of 50 points veteran. It's probably a little north of 85 points veteran. The other issue too is in order to really take advantage of these, you do technically need to run probably like 2 platoons. You need to run at least your rifle platoon, which you're required to do, take a PIAT there, and then probably a heavy weapons platoon to take at least 1 more, maybe 2 more. You could also obviously take a recce platoon if you wanted to, which would give you access to being able to take recce on a transport to move these guys up, which would also be nice. But suffice it to say, you do probably need to take at least 2 platoons. So there is a bit of a tax there if you really want to kind of maximize these. And this is true in general for a lot of the anti-tank teams in the game. It may not be as good as an AT rifle, to be honest, because if you're primarily looking to just generate pins on stuff, the AT rifle team is going to do a better job. At only 25 points regular and with 4 times the range at 48 inches, I mean, you're going to be doing a whole lot more pins with an AT rifle over time just because they can probably start shooting as early as turn 1 and then maybe continue shooting 2, 3, 4, 5 times before somebody finally decides to get around to removing them. Whereas a PIAT is probably maneuvering on turn 1, probably advancing out of a transport to shoot on turn 2, and then maybe being able to stand still and shoot on turns 3 or 4. So your chances of hitting is actually pretty low at the start of the game, and it goes up over time only if you continue to have targets nearby. Because again, 12-inch range, that's the one problem. And once you start hitting on closer to like 4s, maybe even 2s or 3s, right? Depending on whether you're at point blank range and whether you have pins and whether you had to move to get there and, other stuff like that. But if you're looking to do armor removal, anti-tank rifle teams are not particularly good at that, right? And we talked about this in the AT rifle video. But, when it comes to armor removal, the PIAT starting at pen +5, not losing the penetration at long range, the fact that now at point blank range, heavy weapons are getting that extra +1 penetration as well. And if you're going to be within 12 inches with a PIAT, you might actually be within range to get within 6 inches and get to point blank range. It means the PIAT is going to do a dramatically better amount of damage by comparison to your AT rifle team. So if you're trying to do armor removal, I think the PIAT is actually a better choice. Even though it costs you a little bit more, you're actually probably getting a good bit more value out of it. And when we look at pin generation, we find that this kind of holds up, right? So, in the AT rifle video, when we looked at it, pin generation on an AT rifle team, especially in 3rd edition, is really good, actually. You're paying less than 10 points per pin that you're probably going to deal during the game. In 2nd edition, PIATs were getting like 2 to 3 pins per game, depending on how quickly they were removed and how many shots they could get off, which meant you're paying about, 13 to 20 points per pin, which is not bad. It's not great, but it isn't bad for a heavy weapon. In 3rd edition, you can pretty solidly get 3 because you'll maneuver up on the first turn in a transport. From there, you'll then drop out and shoot, probably miss. But then on the following 2 turns, you'll probably hit. And then on the 5th or 6th turn after that, if somebody's still around, you have a pretty good chance of hitting a 3rd time. So if that's your situation, you're looking at about 3 pins per game, which comes out to about 13 points per pin if taken regular. Okay, which is not horrible. It's not as good as the AT rifle team. It is also not as bad as some of the other heavy weapons that are in this thing. When we look at the bazooka in a couple weeks, you're going to see this. That the bazooka also has pretty much the same pin potential. It just costs an awful lot more points. So because of that, it's not horrible. It isn't great. But in terms of damage potential, the numbers are dramatically higher than what we saw in the AT rifle video. So obviously against damage value 11, you're not likely to do a lot to that just because, again, like in order to really even have a chance of doing full damage to it, you'd have to get like within point blank range or maneuver completely around it, both of which is extremely difficult to do. And that means that since we assume the enemy isn't like running full steam ahead 18 inches on the first turn straight towards your lines with their big damage value 11 tank, your first turn is spent maneuvering, which means you don't get a full 6 turns to try to get the hits and the wounds against them, which is why the number is so much lower. As you start looking at damage values 10, 9, and 8, you start getting to more reasonable ground, especially when you hit damage value 8. The fact that you're now, just by declaring the shot, you have about a 1 in 5 chance and better than a single die roll, headhunting a 6 really on a 1 die roll effectively. You are pretty reasonable to do something to it as long as you have a 3 or a 4 plus to hit. If you have to maneuver into position with that 5 plus to hit, you're still not looking particularly good in terms of odds. Okay. So the sweet spot is maneuvering into point blank range or starting in point blank range and having a pin on you, right? Or losing your assistant, right? Or something like that. So you're sitting on 3 plus. 4 plus is what you can probably most likely expect to get. And so because of that, damage value 8, damage value 7 is kind of where you want to live, unless you can hit one of those soft skin vehicles. If you can hit a soft skin vehicle, you're suddenly jumping to a 41.67 or better percent chance just by virtue of the fact that 2s to wound is a destroyed vehicle, right? There's no roll in the damage chart after that. Because you'll see there, even on a 5 plus to hit, you're looking at a 27% chance just by declaring the action that you're going to hit and destroy the vehicle, right? Which is not horrible. That's not bad at all in a dice-based game that uses 6-sided dice. Okay. And when we get to infantry, obviously, like, your chances of hitting and then doing a wound is relatively high only because, again, you're still wounding on 2s. For pretty much everything that you're doing, right? You know, veterans inside a building with an HE 2-inch blast, you're going to be wounding on 3s. But for most everything in the game, you're either firing that shape charge with a pen +5 even against an infantry model, or you're hitting like a damage value 3 plus toe, right? Or something like that. In which case, still 2s to wound blows the thing up, no questions. So, like, your chances of doing wounds are decent against infantry. You're not going to clip very many. That's the problem, right? You know, it's a reasonable chance you're going to do a wound to 1, not necessarily more than that. It all depends on what your target is. But at the very least, the damage potential for a 40-point regular model, this is one of the best we've seen. In terms of objective holding, it could be better, it could be worse. You have 2 men, which is not a great place to start, who admittedly do have probably cover because they're holding your objective. In an ideal world, your objective is placed with some sort of cover around it, and you're taking it regular or veteran. So at least half of the hits that are coming at you are not going to result in wounds, which means you won't have to roll cover for them, which is always nice. They do have a very small footprint, which means it is very easy to get cover. Again, assuming that you're able to make sure that the body of the shooting guy is still covered. So that way, if you need to have that line of sight, you can still get it. You know, like, that's the big question. But it does mean that, like, if you need to just hold an objective just by staying out of line of sight so that people aren't ranging in on you with indirect fire weapons, or they're not shooting long at you with machine guns, like, there's a good number of destroyed tanks or stuff like that that you could hide behind, and they just wouldn't be able to see you because you're relatively short, especially depending on how you model these guys. And then in addition to that, you're relatively small in terms of footprint, right? It's only 2 1-inch base models. So because of that, you can take advantage of cover relatively effectively with this team. You do have minimal ability to attrit the enemy on approach, right? You don't have a machine gun that fires multiple shots. You don't even have a submachine gun that fires multiple shots. You don't even have 2 pistols on the team members. So it's not like if they were to start moving towards you to get within 6 inches, but they haven't assaulted you or whatever. It's not like you can even then just pull out pistols and get 2 dice to roll to try to hit. You're armed with a PIAT. Now, admittedly, the PIAT would be at point blank range, so you'll still be hitting with 2s, right? So it's not bad. 2s to hit, 2s to wound against an infantry section ain't bad at all. 2s to hit, pretty close to 2s to wound probably against any armored vehicle, also not very bad. But it does mean you're only rolling 1 dice, right, to try to attrit people, which means you're only capable really of doing 1 wound to people unless them approaching you means running into a building to get overwatch on that objective to try to clear you out, in which case you might get a turn, maybe even 2 with a 2-inch HE template, but it's not going to be that much. You also do pretty reasonable damage to armor when they're up close. So somebody has to run a tank onto the objective to try to contest it, or if they're just advancing forward because they need something else to follow behind it, then, you know, PIATs will do reasonable damage. The problem, of course, is that most armor is going to have shots at you before you have shots at them. Anything short of like like a vehicle flamethrower, right? Or in a few cases, an infantry flamethrower on a vehicle. But, you know, short of that, PIAT is going to probably be taking shots first. That's not great, but at least if they do get close, you can do pretty reasonable damage, okay? You do have the ability to reactive fire if assaulted, so if somebody tries to assault you from beyond 6 inches, you can shoot the PIAT at them. You won't be at point-blank range, so it'll probably be hit on 4s, maybe 5s if you have a pin, but at least you have the ability to shoot at people, and it is a full 360-degree shot. It isn't fixed. So no matter where they assault you from, you can at least shoot at them and try to knock somebody through a wall with a PIAT blow if you want to. The drawbacks, of course, are pretty obvious on this. It's only 2 men. It is relatively easily removed, especially in close combat. There is a way in 3rd edition to try to make yourself a little harder to remove in close combat with a PIAT team. But, I mean, in general, yeah, like, it's not the greatest, it's not the greatest setup. So there's that. Now, objective taking, on the other hand, there's a lot more to talk about here and a lot more in the PIAT's favor. It is still a two-man team, which means it easily fits in a transport, right? I mean, almost any transport that you buy, especially if you're planning on transporting up some sort of, infantry section. If you're playing from the rule book, you have like Gurkhas. If you're playing from, the third edition Armies of Great Britain book, you don't have Gurkhas anymore. But, if you're running up with like a squad of like 5 or 6 commandos, with a bunch of machine guns, or 5 or 6 paratroopers with a bunch of machine guns, or 5 or 6 SAS with a bunch of machine guns. There's a lot of 8-man capacity transports that you get access to, and you can pretty easily throw a PIAT in there. Add into that LVTs and kangaroos that can have, holding capacity for 12 to 24 people, and you can easily fit a PIAT team into one of your transports, right? It also does have, again, solid penetration versus armor. So if somebody claimed an objective with an infantry squad and then rolled, damage value 9 T-34 or later war Panzer III or something like that onto that objective just to hold it, because now you got to get rid of it in order to take it out. Well, these guys actually kind of like that. That's kind of an ideal situation, right? Is that the infantry, especially the large squads of infantry, have moved on. They didn't move an artillery piece onto it. That would take a long time for us to remove with a PIAT. Instead, they just trusted to a big burly tank. Well, big burly tanks are exactly what PIATs like to chew for breakfast. HE 2-inch template means that at least against buildings, you are able to clear infantry out better, so can be helpful when you need to clear an objective. And while they're not necessarily built for assault, their chances of successfully assaulting an enemy infantry section are actually quite high if it's like an inexperienced small team, right? If it's like a 2-man light mortar team, a 2-man AT rifle team, or possibly even a 3-man medium machine gun or other machine gun inexperienced team, like medium mortar or something like that, these guys are not horrible. Because if you're running in there, you're either regular or veteran, so they're probably doing 0 to 1 wounds against you. But if they're inexperienced and you're rolling 2 dice and you're only looking for a 3+ to do a wound, you might sneak 2 wounds on them. And that means as long as you're not fighting a team of like 4 dudes that are Japanese or Waffen SS fanatics or something like that, there's a very good chance you're going to win that one. And you might be down to just the guy with the PIAT in it, but you might win that one, which isn't horrible. You also have the subtypes, and the subtypes, all of the subtypes are technically useful. I don't think all of them are equally useful, but the subtypes in the New Armies of Great Britain book can be useful, and they do get access to all of them. So you can run any of the PIATs with any of these. The Chindit PIATs means you get the benefit of fieldcraft, so you have a better ability to maneuver into position because you can treat open ground as if rough ground as if it's open ground. This also means that if you are assaulting the enemy and they are in rough ground because they're in a forest or they're in a ruin, you treat it as open ground, which means they don't get to fight first. You fight simultaneously. You're effectively engineers for free, right? Admittedly, not against people in a building, because that's not rough ground. That's a building, right? So there's that. But that at least is really nice. It also means you do get a benefit to outflank these guys. So maybe you don't need to take a transport in order to run these guys. Now, you are paying an extra like 3 points per dude in order to get these benefits. But hey, at least you do have that option. If you take the guards, and this is probably what I would do, I would take them with the guards upgrade, because you can take them regular or veteran, which is nice. Pay like just 1 extra point per man. And now every time they pass an order test to shed, instead of shedding 1 pin, they shed 2, which means if you have them in a transport and their plan was, well, I'm just going to fire at the transport to stack pins on this unit. If you just have like, call it like a Stuart Kangaroo, right? Relatively cheap, damage value 7+, 4-man capacity. You put a platoon commander with a +3 morale bubble in there, and these guys at, I don't know, call it regular. Regular is fine. We'll save ourselves some points. Not a whole lot, but, we'll save ourselves a few points. You now have a starting morale effectively of 12, which means you're pretty likely, even after taking 2, 3, 4 pins, you're probably actually still passing your order test to advance. But if you've taken 2 pins and now you're down to effectively a morale of 10, and then you pass, you shed all the pins, you're now moving out, and you don't suffer the penalty for pins when you're shooting. So now your one-shot weapon is an awful lot more reliable. So I think guards is where it's at. You could also go commandos if you want them to still be able to outflank, but you want the benefit of like +1 point for tough fighters, which is really good if you're planning on using these guys to potentially like, remove a light mortar team or something like that in close combat like we just talked about. I don't know that I would personally do that, because again, you have to take them veteran in order to get the commandos upgrade. So you're already paying like 48 points, and now you're paying some more points in order to get them the benefits. I don't know personally that I would do it, but you can. So there's that. And then you can take them airborne, which would give them stubborn. Again, the issue of having to take them veteran and then you're paying an extra +1 point. You're paying 50 points for this team, which is quite a bit. I'd probably pass on that one too. I don't think stubborn's that useful on a two-man team because by the time you're making morale checks to see if you stick around, you might just be gone, right? Like, so that's the thing. So I would probably not take them airborne unless, again, you're going theme and you want to be able to do that. Or if you're playing with the combat jump rules and by taking the airborne special rule effectively, by taking them as airborne, you get to combat jump them in instead of having to bring them in on a glider, then, rescind. Probably worth it. Having tried to bring things like this on in a glider at a narrative event recently, there are definite advantages to coming in on combat jump. So, things to think about. But of course, the biggest issue with this is that they are relatively easily removed, even if you take them veteran, right? They are relatively easy to remove because there's only 2 bodies. So toward that end, I would use them to clear the objective and then move on. For taking the objective, they're great for just removing it, but then don't try to use them to hold. Bring up another squad, a guards infantry squad or something like that that's right behind them to actually hold the objective and just go down on stuff while they continue maneuvering to get to the next place where they're going to fight. So in terms of target prioritization, what do you want to do? I think you really want to aim for those light armored vehicles. DV7, DV8, you have a very good chance of doing damage to them. If you do damage to them, there's a very good chance something serious is going to happen to them that you can work around, which is excellent. If none of those are presenting themselves to you, soft skin transports and tows are also great. 1, because damage is the removal of them. There's no damage chart afterwards, which is always nice. 2, they tend to be lightly armed. You don't tend to be able to take soft skin transports with more than 1 gun, which means that, the chance that they actually shoot you up before you get into range is actually quite low, which is nice. And the chance they do a lot of pins to you is also quite low, which is also nice. And if they happen to have a unit inside, removing some extra units, even if it's like a Panzer Grenadier unit where they're only suffering D3 hits instead of D6 hits, anything you do above that is just gravy. Above the transport is just gravy. And the transport itself has almost paid for you. So it's really not that bad. And so if you don't have access to an armored vehicle, which is definitely paying for you no matter what it's being run at, consider looking at like a soft skin transport, soft skin car, soft skin tow, something like that. Next, after that, if there are infantry in buildings near you, you can take the HE 2-inch shot. Keep in mind that, if the unit hasn't activated yet and they go down, that could be negative for you. It may not work quite as well, but that is at least an option. If you don't have any of these anywhere nearby, you can shoot at a serious armored vehicle. Just keep in mind the chance you actually destroy it is relatively low. And the chance that they have more than 1 machine gun is quite high. So if you do shoot at it, you better make it count, okay? Side shots, rear shots, something like that is going to help. Point blank range will help you even more. You've got to make sure that you finish it off, though, or at least immobilize it so it can't whip around and shoot you with those forward-facing machine guns. And then finally, if nothing else is available, inexperienced or regular team weapons or officers, especially of the 2-man variety, are perfectly fine for you to go after. Just remember that, you're probably going to be removing them one at a time, right? If you're shooting at them. If you go into assault, you better have a plan to make sure that you're going to win. So what changes would I recommend? Honestly, the big one that I would recommend is I would allow it to fire as a light mortar if you want it to. I wouldn't increase the points cost for this because, frankly, it is fulfilling a radically different role and not nearly in a cost economical way if you only use it as a light mortar, right? By dropping to an HE 1-inch instead of a pen +5, and the fact that, a normal light mortar team costs dramatically less than a 40-point regular PIAT team. Like, if you're primarily using this as a light mortar, you're overpaying, right? Especially since taking light mortars nowadays is not hard to do, right? Just between 1 rifle platoon and 1 heavy weapons platoon, you can take 7 of these, right? So it's not like you were hurting for access to a light mortar. If you're choosing to take your PIATs and you're using them as light mortars the entire game, your opponent's probably actually ending up ahead. But at least it would mean that, if you're in one of those scenarios where you don't have to close, you're already doing fine on removing enemy units, and you want to be able to sit back and fire, at least it would be a little more useful to you in that form. Can't take a spotter, so you'd have to borrow a spotter from somewhere else if that's the case. But this would at least give you a thing that you can do. It was also historically used in this way, not necessarily often, but then again, I also haven't read too many accounts that had the PIAT in it. But of the ones that I read, there were some where apparently it was used for an indirect fire, relatively close range support weapon. So, it was used this way, and I don't have a problem in a historical game giving things the abilities that they were used historically for. I would also possibly consider adding another option. It was inspired by the picture that I saw on the right. I didn't read any accounts of this, but I've seen a couple of these stands that they were present on in museum pictures. And so I would give you possibly the ability for no extra points to declare that on a given turn, you are making the PIAT fixed, that you're deploying a stand for it to sit on. And while it's fixed, it has to remain fixed for that turn and the next turn. So you won't be able to move and shoot on the same turn with it. If you decide to put it in fix, you're probably going to be firing with it that same turn. But while it's fixed, it would add an extra +1 to the to hit roll when firing direct. Okay, so you can't fix it and then fire indirect and get a benefit for that. But you might have the ability, and I don't see a problem with this, to make it slightly easier to hit. Now, why don't I have an issue with this? First and foremost, because it has a 12-inch range. So if you're going to declare this as a fixed weapon and you have reason to believe you can actually use it for a good reason, that means either your opponent decided to move within 12 inches of you with a vehicle and it's still there. So they have reason to believe that they're going to be able to use this as a fixed attack pool against you for a while. That is on your opponent, right? Because the overwhelming majority of vehicles could have shot the PIAT from beyond 12 inches. Okay. Or your opponent decided to rush men into a building to try to get overwatch over a specific objective or to hold a specific objective, at which point you felt like, okay, well, I'm going to fix the PIAT and I'm going to start shooting just my HE 2-inch round against these things, and we're going to try seeing if we can clear this. If that's the case, again, like these were decisions that were made by your opponent at very, very close ranges. I would not support this kind of rule for something like a Panzerschreck or a bazooka. I would support it for a PIAT because I think the PIAT's already embracing so much risk and so much danger just getting in position. I don't have a problem throwing it a little bit of a bone. The second thing is, again, assuming that that's what it looks like and that is actually the thing that's in the pictures, like it would be more stable, right? It would be a little easier to actually look down the sight. I don't know if you've seen people actually firing PIATs without it being on the stand. It is extremely hard to actually aim that thing. And it would be a lot easier to aim, and you wouldn't feel the recoil nearly as much if you had it on a stand. So I think this would make it very interesting. It means that if you were assaulted from not the forward arc, you wouldn't be able to react to fire because again, the men don't have pistols in the squad profile. So you would have to just take the charge. Vehicles that maneuver around it would require it to then take an advance action, so -1 to hit, in order for them to try to track with them and try to continue shooting at them. All of this is a lot of downsides that a relatively fragile infantry section is inviting on themselves willingly for the benefit of a +1 to hit, which I think is perfectly reasonable. So those are the changes that I would recommend. Do you think that any of these things are crazy? Do you think the PIAT is fine as it is? Do you think that it is trash and it shouldn't be run in 3rd edition by any, reasonable British player? Do you think that even after these changes, it would still be trash and it would still not encourage you to take it? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.